Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast presented by DraftKings Pick 6. I'm your host, Brandon Kravitz, joined by RotoWire analyst, the great Nick Whalen. Nick, I've got a storm bearing down on me, but that's not stopping me from locking in to some preseason hoops. I was working the Magic game yesterday, an early tip in New Orleans, so I feel like I shook a lot of rust off. Yes, between last week, our episode that we did together, and yesterday, I feel like the rust is properly falling off.
Yeah, it's I feel like we're kind of under attack by basketball all of a sudden. Like we had that Sunday night football game between the Cowboys and the Steelers delayed on Sunday, and I'm like, all right, what else is on here? I don't really want to watch the NBC crew just kind of drivel on for like an hour and a half. And there's a Bucks Pistons game on ESPN. I didn't even have to like jump through hoops to get it on local TV. It was just on. It's fantastic, man. I love having basketball back. We've already seen, a handful of big name players. I mean, just about everybody's been playing in these preseason openers, which has been nice. Kind of a departure from the NFL preseason when you never really know what you're going to get. But we got our first look at Karl Anthony Towns with the Knicks. LeBron's been in action for the Lakers. Why did the Magic play at like 1 PM yesterday? By the way, was there a reason for this?
So we didn't get a definitive reason, but from what we understand, it was related to the New Orleans Saints playing on Monday Night Football. Now, I know the game was not in New Orleans, the football game that is, but this is still it's like the same it's the same ownership group, and I think a lot of the same employees that work for the Saints also work for the Pelicans as far as the back end operations. So
okay.
I think between them knowing that the Saints were going to be playing on Monday night and then the logistical side of it. So I don't know. What I don't know is, was that game scheduled because simply the Saints were playing on Monday night and they wanted to make sure that all the sports fans in New Orleans could lock in on their football team, or was it a logistical function? That's the part I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was also Kids Day in New Orleans. They brought a bunch of buses in and some younger school kids were going to the game. And I'm thinking that's not something you could pull off with a typical 7:00 tip. So it's some combination of those three things.
See, this is the kind of intel that you're not going to find on any other NBA podcast. You're not going to get, the rationale behind the scheduled time for preseason opener between the Magic and the Pelicans. But having watched that game, Brandon, what were the takeaways? I mean, I watched the Zion Williamson first half highlights, which were impressive. Starting to look a little bit more like old Zion. Obviously, we're keeping an eye for fantasy purposes on the center situation in New Orleans. They started Daniel Tice. He goes 6 of 7 from the field. Did see some Yves Missi off the bench as well. But what about the Orlando side? Anything actionable there?
Yeah, I mean, they looked like the Magic, I think was my biggest takeaway. It was a very similar outfit to what we saw last year. It was a lot of Paolo early on. He had 8 early points, and then the team was struggling to shoot from the outside. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope scored the first bucket for the Magic, so it was nice to see him get involved. But then he had 2 errant threes in the game. I mean, one that just, I think, grazed the backboard. So it's not exactly the start that you would want. This is a team that brought him in not just for the defensive side of it, which it looks like he fits like a glove there, but you wanted some improved 3-point shooting. They shot 25% from 3-point range, and you can go, well, it's just preseason. They don't change the size of the basketball or the dimensions of the court when you get to the regular season. So this is still something that seems to be a bugaboo for this team. As far as the rotation goes, I mean, it looks like Jonathan Isaac is going to continue to come off the bench. He kind of figured that would be the case, especially now that Wendell Carter Jr. has been locked up to an extension. Thought that was sort of peculiar timing. It wasn't something that was on my radar as happening.
Yeah, that was very surprising.
Yeah, I don't. But sometimes, I've been thinking that Wendell Carter Jr. was a trade candidate, just given the glut of bigs they have on this team. But Goga Batadze can play minutes. Mo Wagner can play minutes. You can start J.I. at the 5 if you need to. So Wendell Carter Jr. is not exactly a necessity piece. Sometimes this team restructures contracts just for the ease of the trade. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's still somebody that they're taking calls on.
Ironically, I feel like the Pelicans would have been a team that would be interested in Wendell Carter. Maybe they are. I mean, that would be kind of the perfect, low cost, but still a little bit of upside type of play at center. I mean, I don't know how you can go into the season ostensibly trying to compete and just not have a center. You're just splitting it between Tice and Missy right now. And maybe we see more Zion at center. I think we'll see some of it, but I mean, as fun as that is, like Zion, he doesn't space the floor. He's like what 6'7". It's like there aren't a ton of advantages to that, other than just kind of the classic. Oh, we have versatility, but Zion doesn't really. He doesn't really offer you anything unique there other than the athleticism. Like he's not been a high volume shot blocker. He's an okay rim protector, but that's not really something that's been a huge part of his game at the NBA level. And again, he doesn't shoot. He doesn't have size. He's not going to guard Joel Embiid, so you could get away with that for small stretches, but the Pelicans got to bring somebody in at some point.
And you don't want bigs on the other side that are clogging the paint when that's where Zion is going to operate. So you kind of need somebody that can body up an opposing team's big. It's I think for defensive purposes and for what they want to do on offense, you got to have a little bit more size. They are so wing heavy on this team. We didn't see Trey Murphy yesterday either, so I know that's another big piece injured for them. Yep.
Yeah, he's banged up again, second straight year, which is unfortunate because I love Trey Murphy. Sorry, by the way, I'm a little distracted. The Jets just fired Robert Saleh. So if you tuned in to hear some fantasy basketball talk, we're gonna break the news that Robert Saleh is out in New York.
Oh my God, that is I figured shocking, if I was gonna get there was a brief second there where I'm like, well, I don't know what. That's so random that he would just lie to me about Robert Saleh. There's no way that this guy just got fired after week 5 of the season. That's incredible. I figured if we were going to get Jets breaking news, it would be Devontae Adams headed in that direction. I don't know if this makes that more or less likely at this point.
I think that's coming as well. He was supposed to be on the Kay Adams show today, and then she tweeted late last night, like, oh, Devontae had to cancel. Stay tuned. That's happening. It's happening at some point, I would guess, in the next 24 hours. But anyway, any other preseason games you want to hit?
Yeah, I guess we'll get off of the Robert Saleh train right now before we get in too deep. Well, we saw John Morant avoided serious injury yesterday for the Memphis Grizzlies, so that was good. That nothing too serious. He tweaked his ankle there. Victor Wembanyama didn't play for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And yeah, we're getting another look at this young gun Utah Jazz team. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what they want to be. Lauri Markkanen, somebody that is signed on long term now. He went to the line 13 shots, by the way, yesterday. So getting those reps in early. Keyonte George in the starting lineup, and we're seeing a little bit more from Taylor Hendricks. So maybe that's somebody that I know we kind of left some meat on the bone last year with him. So I think that's one of those guys that maybe you can have on your radar now. Big rebound guy and was a pretty good shot blocker in college.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy you watch closely at UCF, I assume, and somebody I really liked coming out of the draft. I mean, unique player, blocks a lot of shots, like you said, for a guy who's, he's big, but he's not like 7'1". He's more of like a true power forward, but just one of those guys that gave you like all category production at the college level. And Alex and I were actually talking about Taylor Hendricks on the pod a little bit yesterday, and I thought it was strange that they waited so long to really make him a rotation player. It's like we knew where the Jazz season was going pretty early on last year, and it really wasn't until like February, March where they started introducing him as a regular piece. And I mean, I think he's going to start at the 4, right? He started yesterday against Houston. We'll see. I mean, they brought John Collins off the bench, which was interesting. They started Walker Kessler, which they have not wanted to do over the last couple of years. Although apparently there was a report that they were, I think it was the Knicks were inquiring on Kessler, and apparently the Jazz were demanding 2 first-round picks for a guy that they won't start and are playing like 18 minutes a game. So I don't know. There's some sort of disconnect there. But Taylor Hendricks, I mean, even if he doesn't start, if they go Kessler, Collins, Markkanen, I think he's the first big man off the bench, and there's plenty of opportunity on this Utah team. I've been burned by investing in Markkanen the last 2 years because of the shutdown risk. He and Collins are the 2 guys I would worry about most. It's like, I don't think you have to shut down Taylor Hendricks in order to avoid winning games. Sexton might fall into that category as well, but Hendricks and Keyonte George, are the 2 guys that I really like in Utah this season.
Yeah, and I do think that's something that we need to keep an eye on more so this year than even last year, because we kind of knew all year what kind of draft class we were looking at for 2024. Well, 2025 is completely different. There are going to be teams that go heavy into the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, so definitely want to keep an eye on that. I want to ask you just a general question about preseason. Is there something that you look for in the preseason, other than players just kind of shaking off the rust, getting acclimated with new teammates? Is there anything to take away from the way that we see these rotations break down? Because when you have key pieces missing, it can be hard to tell if it's just a variation in the starting rotation because of those injuries, or if this is something that those coaches are actually trying to fit in for the new year.
Yeah, I think it's totally game by game, but again, from what we've seen so far over the last, I don't know, 4 days of preseason games, is like most guys are out there. You're seeing, usually at least like 4 or even 5 starters for most teams, participating. And, if they're not, then you have to kind of do a little more digging and a little more work to figure out, okay, this guy played 24 minutes. Well, that's because, player X wasn't out there. So you don't want to read too much, I think, into the minutes loads overall, because, most of these teams, if they do start their regulars, they'll play, maybe through halftime, and that's about it. Occasionally, I think like the Hornets played some of their starters into the third quarter, but you're not going to get a real representation of what that rotation looks like. Essentially, you just kind of chop it in half and say, okay, all right, Paolo Banchero played 22 minutes for the Magic yesterday. He's not going to play 44 minutes, but it's still a pretty good indication on an kind of an abbreviated night as to how they view some of these players. So, I think for certain teams, you're looking at starting lineups. Like the Jazz are one of those teams. The Pelicans for sure are one of those teams in terms of the the center rotation. But for the most part, the NBA tends to be a lot more consistent year to year compared to like fantasy football, for instance. It's like the good players tend to stay good as long as they're healthy. Whereas, I feel like you see more year to year variance in other fantasy sports. So like I'm not turning on the Lakers to be like, I wonder if LeBron's going to be good tonight. It's like he's playing in his like 22nd preseason. He's going to be all right.
Exactly. So it really is for those. I think the old faces and new places, some of the younger players, like we saw Kyle Filipowski with the Utah Jazz, and you just want to kind of get a look for how do they look in the NBA uniform, how do they look going up against NBA bodies, but until you see how they're going to be factored into a rotation, it's hard to make too much of anything. And like any other sport that you follow, whether it's spring training in baseball, preseason football, stat lines can be very misleading. Couple of news items for you. Shaedon Sharpe set to miss 4 to 6 weeks. Tyler Herro is out tonight with a groin strain. Don't know how serious that is. And Kawhi Leonard says that his right knee is feeling good. He said that there hasn't been a plan set in place yet as to how the Clippers are going to approach back-to-back games, which is the fact that they're still having those conversations isn't necessarily surprising, but perhaps troubling if he was somebody that you wanted to invest in. Anything that I just mentioned that you think is actionable in terms of drafts that are coming up in the next few days?
Yeah, I think we can hit all those. They're saying it's just a groin strain for Tyler Herro. Probably nothing, too concerning. Jaime Jaquez also not going to play in their preseason opener due to the exact same injury. It's probably just guys ramping up. I wouldn't worry about, either of those. It's not like a timetable injury, as opposed to the Sharpe one where we got 4 to 6 weeks. That's tough because obviously Shaedon Sharpe has missed time each of the last 2 years, missed, virtually all of last season. And, he's somebody that fantasy or non-fantasy, you're still, kind of tantalized by the level of talent with Shaedon Sharpe. And, I think this could be something in what's going to be a pretty competitive Blazers rotation. As far as bad teams go, Portland has a lot of dudes, and Shaedon Sharpe, likely to miss at least the first 2 weeks of the regular season. Could be more. A guy who's had these longer term injuries before, that could set him back, right? And Chauncey Billups came out and said, Denny Avdia has been our best player so far this season, and that's somebody that Shaedon Sharpe is directly competing with, not only for minutes but perhaps even for a starting spot on the wing. And obviously this injury gives Avdia a nice runway to kind of grab that job. So it's not something that makes Shaedon Sharpe a complete cross off, but it's kind of the worst time of the year for an injury like that to happen. It does create a buying opportunity though, because I think, some people will see the little red O indicator next to Shaedon Sharpe's name and say, he's injured. And how long is this going to take? Maybe I don't want him. I'm still interested in Shaedon Sharpe, as a later round pick, but Portland is one of those teams. I mean, Houston, I think, is in that category too. They're a better team than Portland, but they have so many guys where you just kind of wonder how that rotation is going to end up breaking down. And then on Kawhi, I'm just, there's a point that I'll take any player. Somebody in the chat during our pod yesterday said they got Kawhi with like pick 60 in a draft, like, yeah, if Kawhi Leonard's on the board at pick 60, I will take him there. I'm not taking him in the 30s, maybe in the late 40s in certain formats, certain builds. I have this feeling that this could be a complete disaster year for the Clippers. I think it could actually work out really well for James Harden. I think he's going to have a monster fantasy season, but I think this is a team that went all in for the last 4 years. Obviously, it didn't work out because of the injuries to Kawhi and to Paul George, and they're under immense pressure with the new building, with the fact that they don't own their first round pick. It's completely unprotected. They're under pressure to win as many games as they can. And I think there's going to be pressure on Kawhi to be out there as often as he can. But Kawhi has always been his own dude. I mean, Kawhi essentially runs his own injury report separate from the team. And as much as they would like him to play back-to-backs, as much as they would like him to play 65 games, I think it's a complete long shot that happens.
Well, and what we could be looking at is you bring up a good point with the new building, and I know Steve Ballmer is going to want to get all that bang for the buck inside of that arena, and it seems like they went all in on the in-game experience, and part of that isn't just shooting cannons into the upper levels and giving free T-shirts to the folks sitting in the 300s, but part of that is putting a good product out on the court. I would not be surprised at all if you see Kawhi Leonard shut down for numerous road games, and that's the way that this plays out. And I would just keep an eye on that as the season goes along. If there's a long road trip, or if they're back-to-back games where they're away from home, I do think that is at least going to play a factor. You're right, Kawhi is his own guy, but if they have any sort of say as to when he's going to miss time, that's definitely going to be part of the factor there.
Just look at what the Clippers starting lineup and rotation would look like without Kawhi. James Harden, Terrence Mann, Derek Jones, Nick Batum, Ivica Zubac. That's probably your starting five. I like Norman Powell this year for fantasy. He's somebody you could still get with his usual, like 115 ADP. I think he's going to probably exceed that. You have nothing beyond James Harden in terms of playmaking or scoring when Kawhi's not out there. And I think you could pencil in at least 20 to 25 missed games for Kawhi. I mean, how many games are the Clippers going to be favored in without Kawhi Leonard? It's good. There's like 3 opponents that they'd be favored in without him. I think it's going to be rough, man. I know the win total is down to, I think it opened at 41.5 and it's down to 39.5. I would hit the under on that. I really would. I mean, they're going to be competitive when Kawhi's out there because, with all the injuries that he's had, whenever he plays, he's always looked like Kawhi. Like he plays extremely well when he's out there, and he's going to give them a chance to win. But I don't think they've insulated this roster with enough secondary scoring and playmaking. It's like, I mean, you could argue that the second best, scorer playmaker beyond Harden, when Kawhi's out, is Kevin Porter Jr., who didn't even play last year.
Are you concerned about James Harden's assist totals with this? I mean, his scoring should be way up, but this is a guy he's been buttering his bread on passing, and I just don't see a lot of options for him with Kawhi out. You bring up some good points there.
Yeah, I think we saw a pretty strong reduction in the assists last year for Harden. He was up over 10 the previous 3 seasons, and then went down to 8.5. I still think there's enough like spot up shooting, I guess, for Harden, and you can envision the lobs to Ivica Zubac and I guess Mo Bamba. I don't see him dipping below where he was last year because you're removing Paul George and you're just putting the ball in his hands that much more. I think the usage rate could take enough of a jump that the assist will at least sustain. But you're right. I mean, he's not exactly driving and kicking to high level players. So I don't know that this will be a 10, 11 assists per game season for Harden, but I think he can still be in the 8 or 9 range.
More coming up on the Fantasy Basketball Podcast, but first let's hear from our guy Nick Whalen and our partners over at DraftKings Pick 6.
We're partnering up with DraftKings Pick 6 this season, and we count down the days until NBA opening night. I can assure you Pick 6 has plenty of NFL offerings for us. You think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards? How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown this week? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. We're talking yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock those picks in, compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's code ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. New Pick Six customers, you play $5 on your first entry, you get $50 in Pick Six credits guaranteed. Again, that code is RotoPick. Play $5, get $50 in Pick Six credits. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick Six not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Bonus is awarded as non-withdrawable Pick Six credits that expire in 30 days. Limited time offer. See the terms at picksix.draftkings.com/promos.
Another brilliant read from our friend Nick over here. If you enjoyed the last episode that Nick and I did together, where we introduced the will soon be an award-winning segment known as The Bounce, you are not going to want to miss it this week, coming up in just a matter of minutes. We've got a new fancy intro for it, especially if you're watching on video. Boy, is this a treat for you. Also, some high upside players I want to get Nick's thoughts on in a couple of minutes, but I was early this morning, I got an email from a commissioner of my high stakes fantasy basketball league, and it was the draft order. Now, this is a 10-team league. This sort of leads into the positionless NBA. It's category scoring, but positions are non-factors.
Okay.
I picked second, which I am ecstatic about. So I will end up with, I'm more of a Jokic one guy, but you certainly sold me on the upside of Victor Wembanyama. So I'll probably end up with one of those two players at that second spot. My question to you is going to be, what do you think the ideal build is with a format like that for the first couple of picks? So you're going to get one of those upper echelon players at number 2. Not so concerned about that, but who are you trying to target on the way back with the second selection?
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to get Wendell Carter, I would think, with one of those first 2 picks. So that's something to consider now that he's locked up on that extension. Yeah, I mean, if you assume Wembanyama or Jokic go 1, then you have your choice of those 2. Or, I mean, you could go Doncic, you could go SGA. I think that's defensible. All those guys, have gone in that range in high stakes leagues already. But yeah, it gets a little more interesting, I think, when you start to try to map out, your second and third round pick. The nice thing about, all 3 of those guys, or all 4 of those players really, is you're not doing any like category compensation, right? Alex and I were talking about like, all right, what do you do if you take Giannis with the 6th overall pick in your draft on yesterday's pod? And then we're like, all right, well, you could either, you could try to, mitigate the lack of threes and the bad free throw percentage by adding players who make up for that, or you can lean into it. You don't really have to worry about that, with these guys at the top, because they are so well-rounded. I think if you take Jokic, you still want 3-point volume. That's kind of the one thing that he doesn't give you, in terms of elite counting stats. I mean, blocks as well. He'll give you a few blocks, but he's not a super high block player. I think in terms of guys who go in that, we're talking like the, 23rd, 24th overall pick. I mean, Karl Anthony Towns is in that range. Scotty Barnes is in that range in ESPN drafts, at least. Tyrese Maxey, Damian Lillard, a guy with an ADP in the late 20s right now in ESPN. I thought he looked really good in the Bucks preseason opener on Sunday. Came out and hit 3 threes in like the first 3 minutes of that game. Good that Damian Lillard has actually been practicing basketball, Brandon, throughout the offseason, something he apparently did not do last year. I think he's a really nice complementary piece, and a guy who, it felt like last year was kind of a disaster for him and the Bucks on a number of levels. And yet, he still finished as the 23rd best player in roto leagues on a per game basis. He was 19th in terms of total value because he didn't miss too many games. So I still think Damian Lillard, even at age 34, would be a pretty nice pairing with Jokic specifically, because you're getting the high volume threes there. I don't know if I'd go Herro in round 2. As much as I like him, you're projecting a jump, but you still got to see it with him. Obviously, Lillard, has like a decade's worth of elite fantasy production. I also wouldn't mind James Harden, man. Alex and I were talking about the idea of like taking him even, in the early second round. If he's still on the board, which in some formats he is, he goes, picks 17, 18 in Yahoo. But according to his ESPN ADP, he's closer to 28, 29. I think, targeting one of those veterans to pair with Jokic makes a lot of sense to me.
I love that positioning in a draft because you really don't have to put a lot of thought into that first pick, and you're going to get a dynamite player, and then you get to target all of this upside on the swing back. And then, of course, being a snake draft, your third round pick just a couple picks later. And then I think that's where you can take, you talk about a guy like Paolo who probably the upside is limited, but you know exactly what stat line you're going to get. So an interesting way to build a team there. Let's talk about some high upside players worth targeting. There was a guy that was missing in action yesterday in the game that I was working with the Magic and the Pelicans, and Trey Murphy, but he is a guy that I have my eye on this year in fantasy basketball. I think we've already seen him emerge, but I think a breakout year could still be coming. Do you view him as a high upside player?
Yeah, I do. And we'll see about this hamstring injury. It could be bumping up against opening night. They said he's out at least 3 weeks. That was as of, last week, October 3rd. So it could be the second straight year where, he's on the shelf to begin the season. It's not going to be as bad as last year when he missed, the full, I think he missed a month plus to begin the year. I still really like Trey Murphy. It's just a matter of, does New Orleans make a point to, kind of create a larger role for him? Because you bring in DeJounte Murray this offseason, but they didn't really send out anybody of real consequence. It's like the logjam at the 3 and the 4 and even the 2. Murphy could play all those spots. It's still there. There's still McCollum, there's still Brandon Ingram, there's still Herb Jones, still Zion. I don't see as of right now, a clear path to Trey Murphy, jumping up from 29 minutes a game to like 33, 34 minutes per game, which would be ideal for fantasy. I think the question is there another move coming? Brandon Ingram has been rumored to be available for a while. The Pelicans have said nothing but positive things about him this offseason. They've said he's, been dominating practices. I don't know if they're just trying to pump up his trade value. Maybe that's possible. Unless there is one of those moves coming, I think Ingram would have to be the guy. I don't think they're overly interested in trading Herb Jones. I still like Trey Murphy, but it's hard for me to say that big leap is coming just because there are too many options right now at the 2, 3, 4 for New Orleans. But you're not paying an exorbitant price by any means for Trey Murphy either. I mean, he's hanging around like pick 100 to pick 120, depending on where you look in terms of ADP. So could he exceed that? Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be a totally different story if you had to take the 65th pick on Trey Murphy. A guy who finished last year, or the last 2 years, I'll say, he was 102 in per game value a year ago, 83rd 2 seasons ago. So I think he still has a really good chance to exceed his ADP. Is he going to be a top 50 guy? I would say as of right now, probably not.
It would take a move. Right now, there is that glut of wings that they have, but if something opens up, he could be one of those league-winning type of players. What about Cam Thomas? We saw a huge leap from 2023 to 2024, 10.6 points per game up to 22.5 points per game, and he had some nights where he looked like the best offensive player in basketball. But those stretches would cool off in a very big way. So are you buying? It seems like Brooklyn's all in on this guy. So are you buying another big year from Cam Thomas?
Yeah, there's definitely a little, like Jordan Poole here. I think the way that we thought about Poole last year of like, oh man, he's the guy in Washington. What could go wrong? But you also had to take Jordan Poole oftentimes inside the top 50 last year. You don't have to do that with Cam Thomas. I think he's been priced up, but not to the point that I would expect. He's still going in the 70s in a lot of drafts. And, you look last year, it's like, despite a lot of those splash games, he still finished outside the top 100. The coast is clear. The coast is clear here in Brooklyn. This will be Cam Thomas's team. I think it's Thomas and Schroeder. I mean, those are really your only, score first, ball dominant type of players. Like Nick Claxton, obviously he's a good player, a good fantasy player, not somebody who's going to stand in the way of Cam Thomas. And, I think Brooklyn, we know what direction this season is going. They made that pretty clear. I don't even view Cam Thomas as a shutdown risk. Like, he's not necessarily a winning player. There's not enough around him on this team that Cam Thomas, putting up 30 a night, it's not going to be winning that many games for the Nets. So I'm in, man. I think Cam Thomas could be a 26, 27 point per game guy. He rebounds okay, for his size and his position. He doesn't really give you a whole lot other than the high volume scoring. Fairly efficient for a guy who takes an insane amount of like double contested jumpers fading away in the mid range. Like he still shot 44% from the field last year, over 36% from three. He was at 38% from three 2 seasons ago. And the big thing with him in roto leagues, Brandon, is he could take 6 or 7 free throws per game this year. That would not be surprising. And he's a 85, 86, 87% free throw shooter. So even though he's not giving you a ton in terms of defensive categories, in terms of assists, in terms of rebounds, he makes up for it with pretty efficient scoring, high volume scoring, and then being one of the elite high volume free throw shooters in the league.
Is there a big name that you'd be willing to take him over? Right now, he's kind of going in a range of Darius Garland, Jared Allen, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Josh Giddey. Are you taking him over any number of those players?
I think it's totally defensible to take him over any of those guys. The question is, you look at, you start looking at guys who go like in the 50s, and it's like, all right, are you going to take him? Are you going to take him over Franz? Are you going to take him over Jalen Johnson?
Yeah.
My answer to that would probably be no. I think like Cam Thomas versus Emmanuel quickly. That's an interesting one. I would probably lean Cam Thomas there. But, in category leagues, it depends on your build, right? And you could say that Alex and I were talking about this yesterday. I mean, you could defend picking like just about anybody based on your build. Like if you're loading up on, I don't know, defensive stats, or you got a bunch of big men with your first, you took 3 big men with your first 5 picks, you might need some more scoring as the draft goes along. And that's where I think it would make sense for Thomas. But, just about any roto league team could use 26 points per game on efficient scoring, right? So I'm in on Cam Thomas, man. I think he's already shown enough. Like I said, I mean, the relative efficiency, given his degree of difficulty on a lot of those shots has been impressive to me. I mean, you watch him and it feels like he should be shooting like 38% from the field, and he's been closer to 45 his whole career.
Who do you view as the high upside player? And maybe the answer is both on the Houston Rockets. It's Amen Thompson, who's entering year number 2, or Jalen Green, and we're still waiting for that pop year from Green.
I think it has to be Green. We're going on year 3 of this now. Like, all right, maybe this is the year. And Jalen Green closed the season really strongly last year, and you don't want to read too much into that. It was kind of right after Şengün went down. He really became the guy in Houston. You look at his last 25 games of the year. He was 25 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, 45, 37, 81 shooting splits. I mean, if you're getting that from Jalen Green, that's fantastic. It's just a question of, can he actually do that when Şengün is out there? Fred VanVleet, is still going to be, playing big time minutes whenever he's healthy. So Houston to me is a tough situation, because you're also, you're trying to develop all these wings. You mentioned Thompson, Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason, guys like that. And then you also introduced Reed Shepherd into the mix. Like, they didn't really lose anybody. You just added like yet another young player to try to develop on the fly while you're also trying to win. And you have a coach in Ime Udoka who, I think is kind of trying to split the difference here, but is prioritizing winning more than anything. So like Jalen Green, I think doesn't necessarily have as long of a leash as a lot of players in this situation would, because Houston is trying to be competitive. Like if he struggles out of the gate, I don't think Udoka is going to, shy away from going away from him. So I think he's still the answer, because this could totally break right. He's like kind of a higher upside Shaedon Sharpe to me in a lot of ways, and he's shown more upside than Sharpe has. But I think the high points for Jalen Green have not necessarily correlated with the fantasy value that you would think they would bring over these last couple of years. So he's somebody that I wouldn't say I'm necessarily targeting, but I think if you're trying to say, all right, who's the upside guy who could really break out in Houston, it feels like it has to be Green, because we know who VanVleet is at this point. He's being drafted, about where he should go. Şengün, it kind of feels like has already had that ascent. So I think it has to be Green.
It kind of feels like it comes down to how much Ime Udoka really lets Jalen Green be Jalen Green, because we saw him dip by about 3 points per game. I think he's got to get up to that 25 points per game mark for us to feel like he's officially arrived. Can that happen? Let's give the people what they came for. It's time for the bounce. Oh, that was as entertaining as I hoped it. Every day I knew I was going to do it. I did it again. It's Tuesday. It is Tuesday. I'm going to give Nick 2 options. He tells me which one he prefers. Wendell Carter Jr. has made it onto the podcast today on a number of occasions. He signed a 3-year, $59 million contract. Dell is ranked outside of the 150s on RotoWire consensus rankings. If you can only draft one, are you selecting Wendell Carter Jr., the starting 5 for the Orlando Magic, or his backup in Jonathan Isaac?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Oh man, I mean, we've been down this road with Carter so many times. I think I would still go Wendell Carter just because I don't trust Jonathan Isaac health wise. I mean, just like literally the worst track record of just about anybody in the NBA right now. So, last year I think we saw some progress. He played in 58 games. I mean, that was his most since 2018-19. So we're talking about a 5-year span. Obviously, a guy who missed multiple full seasons during that stretch as well. And I think Orlando, and you would probably know better than me covering this team. Like I feel like they've had to kind of adjust the expectations for Isaac and almost kind of limit themselves to being like, all right, we like what this guy brings us, but we can only play him in short stints. We don't want to overextend him because of all the injury issues in the past. He's going late enough in drafts that I'm willing to incur that risk. Jonathan Isaac right now, his ADP is right around the same as Wendell Carter. Guys,
Yeah,
are
they're
going
pretty
in
much
that
back to back.
140. Yeah, that 140, 150 range. And if Jonathan Isaac healthy and bump up to even like 20, 21 minutes per game as opposed to the 15 from last year, then, I could see him being the better fantasy player. But at that point, I'll take the guy who's center eligible and Wendell Carter. I'll take the guy who, doesn't have the greatest track record of health in his own right, but is also somebody who I think is significantly safer than Isaac. So I'll go Wendell Carter there. I don't love either of those guys, but I'll take Carter.
I will say, and whether this sways your opinion or not, this is the first time since his rookie season that Jonathan Isaac has had a full summer to actually work out and train for the season, because he's always been rehabbing from an injury. Now, that does kind of point back to your health question mark, because there's a reason why he hasn't been able to. But Isaac looks swole. He has put on a significant amount of weight. He probably put on like 15 to 20 pounds of muscle. So
is that a good thing for him though?
We'll find out. I think it'll be. I'm assuming that he checked in with the training staff and said, "Hey, what if I started bulking up? Do you think that would help?" And yeah, I'm going to guess yes, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But perhaps that gives people out there a little more confidence. Let's take a look at the futures markets. Who would you rather bet on for most wins in the regular season if you can't take the Celtics? Thunder, Knicks, 76ers. So I'll give you three options. They're all between plus 375 and 11-1 to lead the NBA in wins.
All right. So the Thunder, the Knicks, or the Sixers.
Yeah.
To me, it's between the Knicks and the Thunder. I think both of these teams will be very, very good regular season teams. I'll take OKC. I'll take OKC here. I think, you're basically bringing back the same team minus Giddey, plus Hartenstein and Caruso. And I think that is a net positive, a big net positive for the OKC Thunder. And part of the reason that I would go with OKC over the Knicks is OKC has built a really sustainable regular season team. And part of the reason for that is all their guys play. All these guys play games. That's one of the big storylines in fantasy basketball over the last few years. It's just been dodging all of the injuries. It feels like there was a run there where like every star was missing 15 to 20 games. That has not been the case for SGA, for Jalen Williams, for Chet Holmgren, who played 82 games after missing his entire rookie season. I mean, even Giddey played 80 games last year. Lou Dort is a guy who doesn't miss time. Caruso doesn't have the greatest health track record, but I think in this role that should help him. And, Hartenstein is kind of the perfect addition for this team. They've also reinvested, in the kind of draft and develop pieces on that bench. Guys like Isaiah Joe, guys like Aaron Wiggins, who they brought back both of those guys. You still have last year's first round pick in Case and Wallace. I think this is just a really sustainable team, and maybe the number one team in the NBA that I trust in terms of health. And that's probably the number one thing, if you're looking for most regular season wins.
Yeah. The Celtics are the top dog for a reason.
Yep.
But Oklahoma City feels like as safe a bet as Boston at this point. And it is surprising when you see some other teams that are not listed at the top of the odds list, like Denver, who was right there neck and neck with OKC last year. So I think people expecting a little bit of a drop off there. The Spurs to make the playoffs are minus 525 to the no, which is hard to believe given how many teams make it to the playoffs in the NBA, plus 375 to the yes. Are you willing to take the leap on the Spurs as a playoff team in 2024, 2025?
No, I am not. Could they push for a play-in spot? Yes. But would I bank on them to emerge from the playoff? No. And that's what you need in order to catch the yes on that bet. I don't think they added enough. I think that was one of the big things going into the offseason was, all right, how quickly do they want to hit the gas on this? Like Victor Wembanyama is that guy. He's completely lived up to the hype. He's a franchise centerpiece already. How quickly do you want to accelerate things around him? And the answer to that is bringing in Chris Paul on the last leg of his career, drafting Stephon Castle, who I like, but most rookie guards, not winning players right away. And then going and getting Harrison Barnes. Like that was it. I don't know. I'm having a tough time, seeing the internal improvement here from San Antonio. It's like, as great as Wembanyama is, there are very, very, very few players who can just completely drag their team to like 45 wins in year 2. And maybe Wembanyama ends up being that type of guy. Maybe he is that good. But I also think the rest of the league is so talented that it's a lot harder to do that in 2024, 25 than it was in like 2004. When you're looking at guys like LeBron and Melo and Wade, dragging their teams to successful seasons early on. Like there are just no free wins out there for San Antonio. And you're probably asking the Spurs to get to 39, 40, 41 wins just to even be in the play-in zone in the Western Conference. And they'll be better than last year for sure, but I don't think they'll be that much better. So unless there's like an in-season move coming, I don't see this dramatic leap in year 2 for the Spurs. I think they're still slow paying this a little bit more than we would like. And by the way, like their second best player, Devin Vassell, is out with a foot injury. He's going to miss at least the first few weeks of the regular season. He's not going to be reevaluated until November. So like if that's something that ends up, leaking into late November, all of a sudden that's a pretty big loss. I mean, you're taking, in my opinion, 20 to 25 points out of that rotation.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a fun sprinkle, but I don't think plus 375 is enough, especially when the odds makers are saying that on the no, it's minus 525. Yeah. So it doesn't feel like great value.
But I'm not going to bet the no. I just wouldn't take the yes.
Exactly. Shams has taken over for Woj, which is huge news over as the lead basketball reporter on ESPN. Should we be calling breaking news alerts from Shams sham bombs and just take over that from Woj, or should we be calling them sham wows? Which would you choose?
Well, I think, the shams bomb term has been out there for a while. It is clearly a ripoff of Woj. I would like to introduce something else. So yeah, I think a sham wow makes a ton of sense for a number of reasons. Iconic infomercial that I think everybody at this point is familiar with. So yeah, if I'm choosing between the two, I am personally obviously taking the sham wow. I'd also be okay with just not having a term for this. I think
that's not an option. So
it's a little played out. I think it's kind of jumped the shark over the last couple of years, but people are going to do something. And yeah, sham wow, I'm on board with that.
Did you have an off the board submission that you wanted? It almost sounded like you had one that you wanted to make.
No, I was trying to rack my brain for one that, if I need like 3 to 4 hours to prepare for a question like this to evaluate all the options.
That's why I'm giving you. That's why I wanted to give you the options. Put you on the spot and ask you to come with.
I know it's better. It's
internet altering name.
I think Sham Wow was pretty good, man. I don't think we're gonna do much better than that.
Well, that took me 4 hours, so I appreciate it. 4 times a week, you can catch this podcast channel, new episodes cranked out as we get you ready for the NBA season. That's going to do it for us this week on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast, presented by DraftKings Pick 6. I've been your host, Brandon Kravitz. He's the expert, Nick Whalen, and we will be back here with more episodes tomorrow. See you then.